On the night Emeka Okonkwo became the richest man in Lagos, he lost the one thing no market in the world could sell back to him. But let us not begin at the end. Let us begin where all the best trouble begins, with a man who thought he was smarter than everyone. Lagos hummed like a generator that never ran out of fuel. On Lagos Island, Danfo buses wove between each other like needles through cloth, horns screaming, passengers hanging from the doors like ripe mangoes refusing to fall. Street vendors balanced trays of puff-puff and pure water sachets on their heads while tapping away on smartphones. Neon signs from point-of-sale shops, POS agents, and barbershops with names like Sharp Guy Cuts and Fresh Destiny Unisex blinked into the thick, humid night air. The smell of suya drifted across the bridge from a malam fanning coals on the roadside, and somewhere in the distance, an Afrobeat song thumped from a speaker so large it had its own shadow. And in the middle of all of it, in a glass office tower on Victoria Island that caught the sunset and threw it back at the city like a boast, sat Emeka Okonkwo, 34 years old, self-made, or so he told every journalist who would listen. His agbada came from a tailor in Broad Street who charged prices that made accountants weep. His watches told time in 3 cities at once. His penthouse in Ikoyi overlooked the lagoon, and every morning he stood on the balcony, looked at the water stretching wide and silver to the horizon, and thought, not enough. Not yet. People called him a genius. He called himself deliberate. But his grandmother, Mama Ngozi, who still lived in a Face Me I Face You compound in Mushin with a neem tree in the yard and a pot of Ofe Onugbu, always on the fire, called him something else when he wasn't listening. She called him a pot that forgot it once held water. It happened on a Tuesday, because the worst deals in history are always made on ordinary days. Emeka had just closed a land deal that would displace 300 families in Surulere to build a luxury shopping complex. He told himself it was development. He told himself they would find somewhere else. He drove home in his black Prado, not broke down, stopped, engine running, everything on, but completely still, as if the road itself had reached up and grabbed the wheels. And then the old man appeared. He was not dressed like a beggar, but he was not dressed like new money either. He wore a simple Aso-Oke wrapper, deep indigo and burnt gold, the kind woven by hand in Iseyin, the kind that old Yoruba masquerades wore during the festivals Emeka had stopped attending. He carried a walking stick carved from what looked like lightning-struck wood. His eyes were the color of the Lagos sky just before a storm, that strange yellow-gray that makes every hawker pack up their tray and every driver roll up their window. He knocked on the glass. Emeka almost didn't open it, but something in the chest, like a hand pushing from inside out, made him press the button. "Young man," the old man said, his voice as calm as still water at Takwa Bay, "before the speedboats come. I have something you want." Emeka almost laughed. "Baba, I have everything." "Everything?" The stranger tilted his head slowly. "Then why, every morning, do you stand on that balcony, look at the lagoon, and think not enough?" The air conditioning in the Prado went colder. Emeka said nothing. "I can give you more," the old man continued, "more than your hands could ever build, more than your mind can calculate. Within 1 year, you will be the most powerful businessman in this city. Every door will open. every deal will close. Every person you meet will trust you on sight. And what? Emeka said slowly. Do you want in return? The old man smiled. It was not an unkind smile. That was the most dangerous part. Only your shadow. Emeka looked down at the seat beside him. His shadow lay stretched across the leather. Dark, familiar, shaped exactly like him. My shadow, he repeated. Nothing more. You will not miss it. It gives you no warmth. It earns you no money. It is only a shadow. Emeka Okonkwo, the man who prided himself on never signing a bad contract, looked at his shadow, looked at the old man, and thought, what is a shadow worth anyway? Deal, he said. The old man touched the window frame once. The shadow peeled away from Emeka like a transfer sticker from glass, silently, cleanly, and was gone. The car moved. Everything the stranger promised came true. Within 3 months, Emeka's company tripled in value. A foreign investment firm called out of nowhere. Federal government contracts landed on his desk like they had always been addressed to him. He expanded into Abuja, then Port Harcourt, then Kano. Business magazines put his face on their covers, wearing a perfectly fitted senator kaftan, arms folded, Lagos skyline behind him. He gave a keynote at a Pan-African business summit. He bought his mother a duplex in Lekki, Phase 1, and a hire-say bus for his father's transport business in Onitsha. He hired a personal chef. He had a driver and a backup driver. He flew business class domestically, which everyone in Lagos knew was the real flex. But small things began to trouble him. At first, nobody noticed the missing shadow. Why would they? Who looks at shadows in a city moving this fast? But shadows do things we do not realize until they are gone. When Emeka walked into a boardroom on a bright Lagos afternoon, people felt something was slightly wrong, though not one of them could name it. A low, quiet discomfort, like hearing a familiar song with one note missing somewhere in the middle. They smiled at him, shook his hands, signed his papers, but drove home afterward with an unease they couldn't explain. Children, who notice everything that adults train themselves to ignore, would stare at Emeka on the street and quietly move closer to their mothers. The compound dog in Mushin barked the 2 times he visited and refused to stop until he left. His own reflection, he began to notice, looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, like a photocopy of a photocopy, slightly less sharp than the original. And then came the Saturday his grandmother came to Lagos. Mama Ngozi arrived unannounced, the way old women who love you always do when something is wrong. She came with a bag of ogiri and dried ede cocoyam from the market because she did not trust that Lagos people were eating properly. She came to the penthouse. She sat in his expensive chair without commenting on it. She tied her George wrapper tighter around her waist, the way Igbo women do when they are about to say something important, and looked at him walk across the marble floor in the afternoon light, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She saw it immediately. Emeka. Her voice was soft. Naam, where is your shadow? He laughed it off. She did not laugh. Sit down, she said. He was 34 years old, worth hundreds of millions, and he sat down immediately. Do you know the story, she said, straightening her head tea, of the merchant of Onitsha who went to the riverside market and met a trader he had never seen before? The trader sold him success for the price of something small, something the merchant thought was useless. She paused. The elders buried that story in every child for a reason. Mama, I'm not. You're exactly that merchant. You are worse. Because that merchant was poor and desperate. You were neither. She looked at him steadily. Your shadow is not a small thing, Emeka. Your shadow is your proof. It is proof that you are here, that you belong to this earth, that the sun looks at you and says, yes, this one is real. When you walk among people and the ground does not know you, they feel it in a place they cannot explain. In their stomach, in their chest, and no matter how much they smile at you, they will never fully trust what they cannot fully see. Emeka was quiet for a long moment. Outside, somewhere far below, Lagos carried on. The honking and the generators, and the sound of 10 million people living at full volume. Can I get it back? He asked. Mama Ngozi looked at him the way only grandmothers look at you, with a love that has outlasted every foolish thing you have ever done, and is prepared to outlast several more. Go back to the crossroads, but this time, do not go to bargain. Go to give back what was never yours to sell. He went on a Tuesday. Because some lessons are only learned in the same place they were forgotten. He left the Prado at home and took a danfo, because his grandmother had told him, without saying it directly, that humility was part of the journey. He sat squeezed between a woman carrying a tray of tomatoes on her lap and a young man watching football highlights. On his phone, and for the first time in a year, nobody recognized him or treated him like anything other than a regular passenger. It felt strange. It felt right. The old man was at the junction. Of course he was. He was leaning on his lightning wood walking stick, watching the traffic move around him the way a rock watches a river, like he had been there before the road was built and expected to be there after it crumbled. You want it back, he said. Not a question. Yes, Emeka said. The year is not complete. You will lose much of what you gained. I know. The old man looked at him for a long moment. The city churned around them. A danfo driver leaned on his horn. A hawker weaved between cars selling gala and la casera. A woman in a yellow Ankara dress balanced a basket of plantains on her head and talked on her phone at the same time with the calm efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by difficulty. Why? The old man asked. Emeka thought of the children moving closer to their mothers. He thought of the compound dog barking. He thought of Mama Ngozi's eyes. Not angry, just steady and waiting. The way people wait when they already know the answer and are only giving you time to find it yourself. Because, he said quietly, a man without a shadow has not gained more. He has lost something he cannot replace with money. And I have spent a year shaking hands with people who smiled at me but could never fully see me. I don't want that anymore. The old man was still for a moment. Then he pressed his palm flat to the ground of Lagos, to the hot tarmac of Marina Road, that road that had carried merchants and dreamers and strugglers for over a century. The shadow came back like water finding its way downhill, naturally, completely, as though it had simply been waiting for permission to return. Emeka lost the foreign investment firm. 2 government contracts were quietly reassigned. A magazine that had featured him on its cover didn't call back when he reached out about a second profile. The office shrunk. He had to let some staff go, and it sat in his chest for months. But something else happened. When he walked into rooms now, people stopped feeling that quiet, sourceless unease. They looked at him and felt, without knowing why, that this was someone they could trust. Not because he had the most in the room, but because he was fully there. Present, grounded, real. The kind of man the floor acknowledges, and when he walks across it, he rebuilt. Slower this time. He was more careful about which land he bought and whose home stood on it before he signed. He hired a young lawyer from Ajagunle, who reminded him of himself before the penthouse. He answered his grandmother's calls before the third ring. The Suya Malam on the bridge remembered his order after the
third time. And every morning, Emeka still stood on the balcony in Ikoyi and looked out at the Lagos lagoon, wide, brown, busy with boats in light. But instead of thinking not enough, he looked at his shadow stretching long behind him in the early morning sun, proof that the light saw him, proof that the earth knew he was standing on it. And he thought simply, here, I am here. And for the first time in a long time, that was everything. The elders say, be careful what you trade away in a hurry. Some things look like nothing until the day you need them to prove you were ever whole.